The corridors of the North Star Broadcasting Center in Nashville smelled like fresh coffee and hairspray. It was a Tuesday in late October, and the building hummed with the particular kind of nervous energy that only a live broadcast could generate, that electric tension between preparation and chaos, between what was rehearsed and what could go terribly, irreversibly wrong. George Strait arrived at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before his scheduled call time. He always arrived early. Not because anyone required it, not because his contract demanded it, but because that was simply who he was. A man who respected other people's time the way he respected the stage, completely without reservation. He wore dark jeans, a pressed Western shirt the color of slate, and boots that had seen more miles than most people's cars. His hat was in his hand, not on his head. He held it the way a man holds something sacred. Mr. Strait. The production assistant, a young woman named Brianna Wells, barely 23, nearly tripped over her own clipboard when she saw him coming down the hall. "Welcome to the Derek Holloway Show. I'm Brianna. I'll be your point of contact tonight. Good to meet you, Brianna." His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. He shook her hand with both of his. "You doing all right?" She blinked, clearly not accustomed to guests asking her that question. "Yes, sir. Yes, thank you." He smiled and followed her down the corridor. The Derek Holloway Show was, by any commercial metric, a success. It aired live on Continuum Network every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, pulling between 4 and 6 million viewers per episode. Derek Holloway himself had built his career on a specific formula: irreverence, speed, and a cutting wit that audiences had come to expect like a reflex. He was 41 years old, born in Connecticut, educated at Northwestern, and had spent 15 years sharpening himself into a weapon of entertainment. He was charming when he needed to be, cruel when it got laughs, and almost always in control. Almost. His dressing room was 3 times the size of the guest green room, a fact that was not accidental. The walls were covered in framed magazine covers, every one of them featuring Derek himself. Awards, plaques, a golden microphone mounted like a hunting trophy above the vanity mirror. His personal stylist, a thin man named Jacques, was finishing the last touches on his jacket when Patrice Dunning knocked and entered without waiting. Patrice Dunning was 54 years old and had been producing live television for 26 of those years. She had the posture of someone who had survived things: network collapses, talent meltdowns, a live broadcast during a Category 3 hurricane in Miami. She was not icily rattled. But tonight, there was something in the set of her jaw that suggested she was choosing her words with unusual care. "George Strait just checked in," she said. Derek looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Great, Derek," she paused. "I want to talk about the segment. We talked about the segment. I want to talk about it again." He turned in his chair, holding his arms out slightly so Jacques could adjust his cuffs. "Patrice, relax. It's going to be great television. It's going to be a problem if you push it too far." Derek smiled, not the warm smile he used on camera, but the other one, the private one that didn't quite reach his eyes. George Strait is a living legend. The audience loves him. A little ribbing, a little contrast between then and now. It creates texture. It creates conversation. It creates lawsuits if you're not careful. I'm always careful. She looked at him for a long moment. His team hasn't approved anything beyond a standard interview format and the performance segment. His team approved him being on the show. Everything else is live television. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and looked at himself in the mirror with undisguised satisfaction. That's the beauty of it, Patrice. Nobody can predict live television. She left without another word. In the corridor, she stopped and pressed 2 fingers against her temple, the way she always did when she was doing the mental calculation between what she could control and what she couldn't. The numbers weren't adding up tonight. In the green room, Ray Colburn was on his phone. Ray Colburn had been George Strait's manager for 22 years. He was 60 years old, heavy-set, with the kind of silver hair that looked distinguished on some men and tired on others. On Ray, It looked both, depending on the day. Tonight, it looked tired. He was reading something on his screen with the focused expression of a man reading a legal document, which is exactly what he was doing, George. He looked up. "You seen any of Holloway's recent episodes?" George was sitting in the corner of the green room, one ankle crossed over his knee, looking perfectly at ease. He was reading something too, but it was a worn paperback novel, the spine cracked from multiple reads. He looked up, couple of clips, and he's sharp. George turned a page. Likes to push. That's one way to put it. Ray set his phone down. His last 3 musical guests, he spent more time making jokes about them than letting them talk. Bobby Crane walked off the set. Bobby Crane, George. The man has been in the business for 30 years. Bobby Crane has a temper. And you don't, which is why I'm not as worried as I probably should be. Ray picked up his phone again. "I just want you to know what you're walking into." George closed his book, holding his page with his thumb. He looked at Ray with that particular steadiness that had unnerved record executives and humbled stadium crowds in equal measure, not the stillness of someone who had nothing to say, but of someone who had learned that most situations didn't require saying it yet. "Ray, yeah, what song did we land on for the performance?" Ray paused. There had been 3 options on the table for the performance segment. The label had pushed for one of the newer tracks, something with a more contemporary arrangement that their marketing team thought would reintroduce George to younger demographics. George had listened to the suggestion, nodded politely, and said he'd think about it. The label wants "Cross My Heart" or the new one. I know what the label wants. A beat of silence. "What do you want?" Ray asked. George opened his book again. Troubadour. Ray studied him. Troubadour wasn't on the short list, it is now. Ray exhaled slowly through his nose. He had learned, over 22 years, to recognize the difference between George being casually stubborn and George having already made a decision that was beyond negotiation. This was the second kind. "All right," he said. "I'll tell the band." At 7:15 p.m., Nolan Vickers was in the control room running his 4th technical check of the evening. Nolan was the show's live director, 38 years old, former documentary filmmaker. Recruited to the Derek Holloway show 3 seasons ago when the network decided they wanted the broadcast to feel more cinematic. He had 6 cameras, a crew of 21, a floor manager named Pete Ashford, who communicated exclusively through hand signals and meaningful eyebrow movements, and a headset that had been on his head for so long it had left a permanent indentation above his left ear. He was good at his job. He was also, on this particular evening, nursing a growing unease that he couldn't quite name. "Camera 2, give me a wider on the desk," he said into his headset. "And someone tell Derek's earpiece guy that if there's feedback again during the opening, I'm going to have an actual breakdown." His assistant, a young man named Cooper Hale, slid a revised rundown across the desk. Nolan glanced at it. "Who changed the segment order?" "Derek did, about an hour ago." "He moved straight to the first guest slot?" "Yeah." Nolan looked up at the bank of monitors. On one of them he could see the feed from the green room. George Strait, perfectly calm, reading a book. On another, the audience was filing in, the warm-up comedian working the room into a state of manageable excitement. On a third, Derek was doing his pre-show ritual, pacing the width of his dressing room with the particular focused intensity of a man rehearsing jokes he would later pretend were spontaneous. "Why did he move him up?" Nolan asked. Cooper shrugged. "Didn't say." Nolan put his headset back on. He had a feeling, the same feeling he'd had once before a live broadcast when a guest had announced a divorce on air, that tonight was going to be one of those nights that people in television talked about for years. He just couldn't tell yet whether it would be the good kind of talked about or the other kind. He suspected the other kind. Carla Fontaine arrived at the North Star Broadcasting Center at 7:40 p.m. with a press credential, a recorder, and the instincts of someone who had been covering the entertainment industry for 14 years. She wrote for the American Pulse, a national culture and entertainment publication that sat somewhere between journalism and criticism, serious enough to be respected, accessible enough to be read. She had covered George Strait twice before, once at a festival in Texas, once at an industry retrospective in Los Angeles. Both times she had come away with the same impression, that he was one of the few people in the music industry who was exactly who he appeared to be. No performance of humility, no calculated image management, just a man who loved music and treated people decently. She had not requested the assignment tonight. Her editor, a pragmatic woman named Donna Reese, had called her that afternoon. "Strait's on Holloway tonight," Donna had said. I want someone there." "For what?" "It's a talk show appearance. It's Holloway." A pause. Something always happens with Holloway. Carla had packed her recorder. Now she was in the press area, a small section of seats to the left of the main audience, separated by a low railing, and she was watching the control room monitor feed that was visible from her position. She had her notebook open. She was watching Derek Holloway pace his dressing room on the monitor, and something about the energy of his pacing made her write a single word in her notebook and underline it. Premeditated. The broadcast went live at 8:02 p.m. Eastern, 2 minutes behind schedule due to a minor technical issue with the main title card graphic, an omen that Nolan Vickers noted silently and said nothing about. Derek Holloway walked out to his theme music with the ease of a man walking into his own living room. The audience responded the way they always did. Immediate, warm, slightly breathless with the particular excitement of being present for something live. He stood at his mark, spread his arms, soaked it in, then sat behind his desk with the fluid confidence of someone who had done this so many times it had become instinct. His monologue was sharp. It was always sharp. 6 minutes of jokes about current events, a callback to a bit from the previous episode, a self-deprecating line about his haircut that got a bigger laugh than it deserved. He was good at this. Whatever else could be said about Derek Holloway, he was genuinely, undeniably good at this. Then he looked at his card. "Our first guest tonight," he said, leaning into the camera with a conspiratorial smile, "is a man who has sold over 100 million records. A man with more #1 country hits than any artist in history. A man who, I have to be honest with you," he paused, tilted his head slightly, "I wasn't entirely sure was still touring." A ripple of laughter from the audience. In the control room, Nolan Vickers looked up from his monitors. In the green room, Ray Colburn went very still. "Ladies and gentlemen, the king of country, George Strait." The band played. George Strait walked out. The audience's response was immediate and genuine, not the polite enthusiasm reserved for names. People recognized but didn't particularly care about, but the real thing. The kind that comes from a crowd when someone walks into the room who actually means something to them. Several people stood before they'd even decided to. The sound rose and filled the studio with something that felt less like applause and more like recognition. George walked to the guest chair with the same unhurried ease he'd carried through the corridors earlier. He shook Derek's hand, firm, brief, no performance in it, and sat down. "George Strait," Derek said, shaking his head slowly, as if witnessing something remarkable. "Still out here." "Still out here," George said. The audience laughed warmly. Derek leaned back. "I have to ask you, and I mean this genuinely, how does it feel to be, and I'm going to use the word carefully here, a relic?" The word landed in the room like something dropped. Not a joke, or rather, framed as a joke. Delivered with the smile and the slight comedic elongation that Holloway used to give himself plausible deniability. But the audience felt it. There was a half-second of silence before the laugh track. No, not the track, the real audience, produced something that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite silence. An uncertain sound. The sound of people who weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh. George Strait looked at Derek Holloway with an expression that did not change. "I've been called worse," he said. The audience laughed, this time genuinely, with relief. Derek pressed forward. No, but seriously, country music has changed so much. When you were coming up, it was all, he made a vague, sweeping gesture, hats and horses and heartbreak. And now it's different. Don't you ever feel like the world kind of moved past you? Music changes, George said. Always has. Right, but Derek smiled brightly. Do you feel relevant? Like, do you wake up in the morning and think people still care about what I'm doing? Or is it more of a nostalgia tour situation? In the press section, Carla Fontaine had stopped taking notes. She was watching George Strait's face. In the control room, Nolan said quietly, "Okay, here we go." George was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone deciding which of the available words to use. "I think," he said, "that music that's honest finds the people it's supposed to find. Doesn't matter what decade it is." "That's a beautiful answer," Derek said, with a smile that made it sound like a consolation prize. Very dignified. Another pause. "Can I show you something?" He turned to the large screen behind his desk. "We did a little look. Our producers put together a quick segment, just a fun thing." The screen lit up. What followed was 90 seconds of video, a montage clearly assembled with effort, that juxtaposed clips of George Strait performing in the 1980s with clips of contemporary country pop artists performing today. The editing was deliberate. George's footage was shot in soft, slightly grainy archive quality, giving it the visual texture of something old and dusty, while the contemporary clips were crisp and bright. The implicit message was unmistakable even before Derek Holloway added narration. "Look at that," Derek said cheerfully over the footage. "Bless his heart." The audience laughed, more of them this time, carried by momentum and the social pressure of being in a crowd. On screen, a clip of George performing in 1992 was paired with a clip of a 24-year-old artist with a stadium production worth more than some countries' GDP. The contrast was engineered to make George look small. And then Derek said the thing. He said it with his full smile, looking directly at the camera rather than at George, a performer's choice. The choice of someone playing to the room and not to the person sitting 3 feet away from him. "I just think, and look, I say this with total respect, I just think there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, is the hat still wearing the man, or is the man just wearing the hat?" Laughter. Real laughter this time, the kind that comes when an audience decides a joke is safe enough to commit to. George Strait said nothing. He sat in the chair with his hands resting on his knees, and he looked at Derek Holloway. And his expression was the same expression it had been since he sat down, composed, unhurried, unreadable in the way that deep water is unreadable. And in that silence, something shifted in the room. It was Carla Fontaine who noticed it first, not because she was closer, but because she was watching. The audience's laughter faded a beat earlier than it should have, the way an echo dies in a space that has suddenly become too large for the sound. Derek felt it too. He opened his mouth to continue. "Derek." George's voice was quiet, not sharp, not cold, just present. "I appreciate the segment. Of course I'd like to play something for your audience." A pause. Derek blinked. We have the performance block later in the show. Now if that's all right." It wasn't a question. The grammar made it sound like one, but the tone didn't. Nolan Vickers in the control room said, "Someone get Patrice." The 15 seconds that followed were among the most significant in the recent history of live American television, though no one in the room had the perspective to know that yet. Derek Holloway was, in the vocabulary of his profession, an improviser. His entire brand was built on the ability to pivot, to absorb the unexpected, and redirect it into entertainment. He had handled drunk guests, crying guests, guests who announced unexpected pregnancies, guests who had arrived having clearly taken substances that altered their decision-making. He was good at the pivot. But something about the way George Strait had spoken, the quietness of it, the absolute absence of aggression or pleading, the simple declarative weight of "I'd like to play something," produced in Derek Holloway a brief and genuine uncertainty that was visible to those watching closely, as a slight tightening around his eyes. Derek laughed, turning to the audience. "The man wants to play. Who am I to say no? The audience cheered, and in the cheering, Derek found his footing again, the familiar ground of audience approval, and his smile returned at full wattage. Ladies and gentlemen, apparently we're doing the performance right now. George Strait, everybody. George stood. He took the microphone from the stand beside the guest chair, not the elaborate production microphone that was set up for the formal performance segment later, just the one that had been there for the interview. He walked toward the area where his band was set up, and as he walked, he said something to his guitarist, a man named Dale, just 3 or 4 words too quiet to be picked up by the boom mics. Dale nodded once. Patrice Dunning arrived in the control room at a pace that was technically walking, but was emotionally a sprint. She looked at the monitors, assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds, and turned to Nolan. "What's he doing?" "He's going to play," Nolan said. "We're not set up for sound balance in this segment, I know. The lighting is wrong. I know, Patrice." She stood there for a moment watching the monitor where George Strait was positioning himself, adjusting the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "What is he going to play?" she asked. Nolan shook his head slowly. "Nobody told me." Ray Colburn was watching from the wings. He had been in this industry long enough to have witnessed most of the ways that live television could go wrong, and enough of the ways it could go unexpectedly, transcendently right. He had watched George Strait perform for presidents, for stadiums of 80,000 people, for small clubs in Texas where the ceiling was low and the air smelled like sawdust and beer. He had seen him perform through grief, through physical pain, through the particular exhaustion that comes from decades of carrying something as heavy as a legacy. He had never seen him do what he was about to do. Not because it was unprecedented. George had played acoustic, had played with minimal production, had played in situations where the technical conditions were far from ideal, but because of what had just happened in that interview chair. Because of the specific combination of provocation and restraint and the particular silence that had followed Derek Holloway's last joke and the way George had responded to it and the song he had chosen, Ray knew what Troubadour meant to George. He knew when it had been written and what it had cost to write and what George had said about it in the 2 or 3 unguarded moments over the years when George had talked about it honestly. He knew that George had performed it at his own father's funeral. He knew that George had said in an interview years ago that most people had forgotten that Troubadour was the song he would want played when he stopped performing, not as an ending, but as an explanation. He knew all of this, and watching George adjust that microphone in the too bright interview lighting, Ray Colburn felt something he was not entirely prepared for. He felt proud. Not in the way a manager feels proud of a client's commercial success, in the way you feel proud of someone when they are in a moment of pressure, completely and irrevocably themselves. In the audience, people were shifting. The show's regular viewers were accustomed to a specific rhythm: Derek's monologue, the first guest interview, a comedy segment, the second guest, and then the performance. The deviation from the format created a low-level agitation, the mild disorientation of a train taking an unexpected turn. People checked their phones. Some whispered to neighbors. The warm-up energy from before the broadcast had been replaced by something different, something that hadn't been calibrated by the production. A woman in the 4th row, her name was Beverly Ashton. She was 67 years old. She had driven from Murfreesboro with her daughter as a birthday gift to herself, had her hand pressed over her mouth before George Strait played a single note. She couldn't have explained why. It was something in the way he stood. Her daughter, who was 38 and had grown up hearing George Strait on her mother's car radio and had thought of him as background music, as the ambient sound of childhood, leaned over and said quietly, "Mom, you okay?" Beverly nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Derek Holloway was back behind his desk, in his default position, the command position. He had his host's smile on. He was performing ease, performing comfort, performing the role of a man who had orchestrated this moment rather than been maneuvered into it. But his producer, sitting in the front row of the audience section with a headset on, a young woman named Trish Galvey, was watching him with the specific attention of someone monitoring a situation for collapse. And what she saw was that his right hand, beneath the desk, where the cameras couldn't see it, was tapping. Derek only tapped when he was nervous. He was never nervous. Carla Fontaine had put her notebook on her knee, pen hovering. She had covered enough performances to have developed a kind of pre-show instinct, a sense, in the seconds before music began, of whether what was coming would be ordinary or significant. It wasn't mystical. It was the accumulation of 14 years of paying attention to rooms, to bodies, to the particular atmospheric pressure of a space when something real was about to happen. The air in the studio had changed. She couldn't have articulated it precisely. It was something in the quality of the silence between the last of Derek's words and the first of whatever George Strait was about to do. The way the room had stopped its ambient motion, the whispering, the phone checking, the constant small negotiations of 200 people sharing a space. It had gone still in the way that spaces go still when everyone, without knowing why, has decided to pay attention. She wrote 2 words in her notebook. Here it comes. Patrice Dunning was on the phone. She had stepped to the back corner of the control room and was speaking in the low, clipped tones of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be delivering. I know, she said. I understand that. But we're live. And a pause. No, I can't cut to commercial. We just came back from commercial. It would look. Another pause. Longer. Richard, listen to me. I've been doing this for 26 years. Whatever is about to happen in the next 4 minutes is going to be the thing people are talking about tomorrow morning. The question is what they're saying. She listened. Right, that's what I thought. She ended the call and looked at Nolan. Keep the cameras on him, she said. Nolan nodded. He had already made that decision. On the monitor, George Strait adjusted the microphone one final time, and the band settled into their positions, and the studio went quiet in that particular way that precedes something that cannot be taken back. He didn't announce the song. He didn't say anything at all, which was itself a kind of statement in a medium that was built on the premise that silence was dead air and dead air was failure. He simply stood in the too bright light of a television studio that had been arranged for a different purpose, held the microphone the way a man holds something he has carried for a long time, and began. The first note was acoustic guitar, Dale finding the opening chord with the quiet certainty of someone who had played it hundreds of times and understood exactly what it was asking of the room. And then George Strait sang. I was a young troubadour when I rode in on a song. The voice was what it had always been. Not unchanged, it had deepened over the decades, acquired the particular resonance that certain instruments develop with age, a quality that cannot be manufactured or replicated or auto-tuned into existence because it is not a sound, but a history. It was the voice of a man who had spent 50 years in rooms like this one, and smaller and larger and outdoors under skies that went on forever, and had sung through all of it, had brought his whole life to bear on every performance with the consistencies of commitment that was, in its own way, the most remarkable thing about him. I'll always be a troubadour, so that's how I'll carry on. In the control room, Nolan Vickers did not move. His hand was on the camera switcher, ready to cut to the wide shot, to camera 2, to the audience, to the standard visual vocabulary of a musical performance. He didn't use it. He held on the tight shot, George A's face, the microphone, the clean, unadorned image of a man singing. And he held it with the instinct of someone who understood that the image in front of him was already the right one. On monitor 4, he could see the audience. Beverly Ashton in the 4th row had her eyes closed. The woman next to her, a young woman, maybe 25, who had been on her phone 30 seconds ago, had put the phone in her lap and was sitting perfectly still with an expression. On her face, that was the expression of someone encountering something they hadn't expected to feel. 3 rows behind her, a man in a Vanderbilt sweatshirt had his chin up and his jaw set with the particular rigidity of a man trying not to cry in public. I may be a young man's ghost, but I still got a young man's dreams. Derek Holloway had not moved from behind his desk. This was unusual. Derek's standard practice during musical performances was a kind of performative appreciation, nodding along, smiling, creating the visual impression of a host who was moved and engaged while actually monitoring the audience response and calculating his next move. It was a well-practiced performance of attention. He wasn't performing it now. He was sitting very still, and his expression had done something that expressions on live television almost never did. It had become unguarded. The professional smile was gone. The calculated ease was gone. What remained was the face of a man who was, in spite of himself and his intentions and the entire architecture of the evening he had planned, actually listening. Carla Fontaine was watching him. She had shifted in her seat so that she could see both George and Derek simultaneously, dividing her attention between the man singing and the man who had decided to make him the subject of a joke, and what she was watching, in real time, on live television, in a room of 200 people and however many millions watching at home, was a reversal. Not a dramatic one, not a confrontation or a collapse or a moment of obvious, filmable humiliation. Something quieter and more durable than that. She was watching someone be reminded of something he had forgotten. Some say I'm living in the past, but maybe the past ain't past. Ray Colburn in the Wings had stopped managing anything. He had been in professional motion since 4:47 p.m. to calls. Logistics, rundown adjustments, band confirmations, the 100 small operational decisions that constituted his job. He was still now. His phone was in his pocket. His arms were at his sides. He was watching his client perform in a television studio on a Tuesday night in October, and he was thinking about the first time he had heard George Strait sing. 23 years ago, at a venue in San Antonio that no longer existed, and about how he had thought then, and had been right, that this was someone for whom music was not a career, but a constitution. The fundamental law of how he operated in the world. You could make him look old on a montage. You could call him a relic on national television. You could engineer 90 seconds of carefully edited footage designed to make his life's work appear dusty and irrelevant. And then he would sing, and the room would remember. I was a young troubadour when I rode in on a song. The chorus returned, and with it something happened in the audience that Nolan caught on camera 3. A camera he had positioned at the back of the house to capture wide audience reaction, and what the camera showed was a wave. Not the manufactured wave of a coached audience, not the Rolling Arms Stadium performance. A real one, people rising, not all at once. One here, then another, then a cluster of 3, then a section, then most of the room. People who had driven to a television studio in Nashville on a Tuesday night to watch a talk show and had ended up somewhere else entirely, in the presence of something they were responding to the only way they knew how. Standing. Patrice Dunning watched it on the monitors and felt something she hadn't felt in years of live television. The particular chill of a moment that was beyond the reach of production, beyond the control of cameras and lighting rigs and segment timing. A moment that was simply happening because a man had stood in a room and sung a true song. Her phone rang. The number on the screen was the network's vice president of programming, a man named Gerald Fitch, who was watching from New York. She declined the call. She would call him back when it was over. On monitor 1, George Strait's face was completely open, not emotional in the performed sense, not crying or dramatically moved, but open in the way that certain faces become when a person is completely present in what they are doing, when there is no gap between the person and the act. He was singing the way he had always sung. The way, Carla Fontaine would write later, that some people pray not for an audience, not for effect, but because it was the truest language available to them. I'll always be a troubadour, so that's how I'll carry on. The last note settled. The guitar chord faded, and the room for exactly 2 seconds did nothing. That 2-second silence was in Nolan Vickers's 20 years of live television, the most significant 2 seconds he had ever directed. The silence of a room that has received something and has not yet found the language to respond to it. The silence of 200 people simultaneously at the edge of something. Then Beverly Ashton, in the 4th row, began to applaud, and the room came apart. The sound of the applause was different from the applause that had greeted George when he walked out. That had been recognition. This was something else. Something raw, less managed, less a social performance and more a physical necessity. The kind of applause that comes from people who need to do something with what they're feeling, and clapping is the only available option. George Strait stood in the light, holding the microphone at his side, and looked out at the room with an expression that was something close to, not satisfaction, not vindication, but something like completeness. The expression of a man who has said what he came to say. He nodded once. He walked back to the guest chair. Derek Holloway had his mouth open slightly, which was, for Derek Holloway, the equivalent of total structural failure. He closed it. He looked at his desk. He looked at his card. He looked at the audience, who were still on their feet, whose applause was still going. And he did something that nobody in the show's production staff, not Patrice, not Nolan, not Trish Galvey in the front row, had ever seen him do before. He waited. He didn't redirect. He didn't insert himself. He didn't reach for a joke or a pivot or a host's anchor comment to reestablish the rhythm of the show. He simply sat behind his desk and waited for the room to finish doing what it needed to do. It took 47 seconds. When the audience finally settled, not because they wanted to, but because the physics of it ran its course, Derek looked at George. And the look on his face was one that the cameras caught, and that millions of people watching at home and in bars and in hotel rooms and on phones on every available screen would see and interpret and argue about in the days that followed. It was not contrition. It was not a performance of apology. It was something more complicated than either of those things. The look of a man who had been confronted with the mirror he didn't know was in the room, and who was still in the process of deciding what to do with what he saw. George Strait, ladies and gentlemen, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. In the control room, Nolan's phone had been ringing for 40 seconds. He had 6 missed calls, 3 from Gerald Fitch in New York, 1 from the network's legal department, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, and 1 from his wife, who was watching at home and had texted, "Nolan. Nolan, is that real?" He picked up Gerald Fitch's call. "I know," he said. "What is happening?" Gerald's voice had the quality of a man trying to sound in control of something he was not in control of. Gerald. Fitch was 58 years old and had spent 3 decades in network television and had witnessed most of what that industry had to offer. His voice on the phone was the voice of someone witnessing something new. "George Strait happened," Nolan said. "That performance was not on the rundown. No, it was not." The segment ran 4 minutes over, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. A pause. "The social media team is Nolan. The clip is already, I know." "How did you know to hold the tight shot?" Nolan looked at his monitors. On one of them, the show was still going. Derek had recovered enough to go to commercial, and the audience was milling in the break. People still talking, still processing. The energy in the room different from any energy he had felt in 3 seasons of directing this show. "I didn't know anything," Nolan said. "I just kept the camera where the truth was." A longer pause. "Don't say that to anyone else," Gerald said. "Say it to the Emmy committee." In the press area, Carla Fontaine had written 3 pages of notes in the last 6 minutes. Her handwriting, usually precise, had loosened into something almost urgent, words piling up, sentences incomplete, arrows connecting observations she would later develop into the piece that would run in the American Pulse 48 hours from now and become one of the most widely read entertainment articles of the year. She reviewed what she had written. Speechless. First time I've seen it. Audience standing, real standing, not coached. 47 seconds of applause. B-row 4, hands over mouth through entire performance. The young woman on the phone in lap before first chorus. The Vanderbilt sweatshirt guy crying by second verse, trying not to. What just happened was not a performance in the showbiz sense. It was something closer to testimony. GS didn't perform at anyone, didn't perform for anyone. He just sang. The relic argument, when applied to this man, does not survive contact with the actual man. She underlined that last line twice. Then she looked up at the monitor where the commercial break was running, and she thought about what she had just watched, and she thought about the 2-second silence that had preceded the applause. And she thought about what it meant that a room full of people who had come to watch a comedian interview celebrities had ended up inside something that felt, there was no other word for it, sacred. She wrote one more thing. Derek Holloway made a relic joke. George Strait answered with 4 minutes of proof that the concept doesn't apply to him. The question now is what Holloway does with that. Backstage, in the narrow corridor between the green room and the stage exit, Derek Holloway and Patrice Dunning were having a conversation. It was a very quiet conversation. The kind that happens when two people are in the middle of a live broadcast and cannot afford the time or the volume for the conversation they actually need to have. Patrice was standing with her back to the wall. Derek was facing her, his arms crossed, though not in the defensive way, in the way of a man who is trying to hold himself together. It was a performance, he said. It was unclear whether he was making an argument or asking a question. Yes, Patrice said. He played it perfectly. He sang a song, Derek. He knew what he was doing. Of course he knew what he was doing. She looked at him with the particular directness of someone who had long since moved past the option of being tactful. He's been doing it for 50 years. That's exactly the point. Derek uncrossed his arms. He turned and looked at the monitor on the corridor wall where the commercial was still running. A car ad. Something bright and fast, cut and kinetic. Everything that the last 4 minutes had not been. The network's calling, he said. I know. I declined, Gerald. You declined the VP of programming. I'll call him back. She paused. Derek, look at me. He looked at her. Whatever you're thinking about doing in the second half of this show, don't. I wasn't going to. Don't, she said again. Not loudly, with a finality that foreclosed argument. The broadcast ends in 42 minutes. You finish it the way you always finish it. Professional, sharp, yourself. And then tomorrow you and I and the network's PR team and probably the legal department are going to have a very long conversation. He looked at her for a moment. Do you think he planned it? Derek asked. The song. Do you think he picked it specifically for tonight, or does it matter? He thought about it. No, he said. I guess not. She pushed off from the wall. 42 minutes. She walked back toward the control room. Derek stood alone in the corridor for a moment, and his face, without an audience and without cameras, did something that it almost never did in professional contexts. It showed uncertainty. The second half of the Derek Holloway show was, by the show's own standards, unremarkable. Derek returned from commercial, conducted his second guest interview, an actress promoting a film, pleasant and uncomplicated, ran the comedy segment, closed the show with his usual sign-off. He was professional. He was technically sharp. He landed his jokes, but anyone who watched both halves with attention would have noticed something. He was quieter, not subdued, not broken, just quieter. The particular aggressive brightness that was his signature, the relentless forward momentum of his performance style, had been turned down by some increment that was hard to quantify but impossible to miss. Trish Galvey, sitting in the front row, noticed it within 90 seconds of the return from commercial. Cooper Hale in the control room noticed it in the way Derek held his cards, loosely, distracted rather than with his usual grip. Carla Fontaine, who had stayed for the full broadcast, noticed it in the moments between segments, when the camera cut away and Derek's face lost its performance for a fraction of a second. And what she saw in those fractions was a man doing mental arithmetic that had no clean solution. The broadcast ended at 9:01 p.m. Eastern. The clip of George Strait's performance had already been viewed by that point over 2 million times. George Strait left the building at 9:23 p.m. He walked out the same way he had walked in, unhurried, coat on, hat in his hand. Brianna Wells was still on shift, still holding her clipboard, and she was at the exit when he came through. Mr. Strait. She looked like she had been crying, though she had clearly tried to conceal it. I just wanted to say, "Thank you for tonight, Brianna," he said. He shook her hand with both of his again, the same way he had when he arrived. "You take care of yourself." He walked out into the Nashville evening. Ray Colburn was already at the car. He was on the phone, but when he saw George coming, he ended the call without saying goodbye, something he had never done in 22 years of managing phone calls. George got in. They drove in silence for a while. "Your phone is going to need its own area code by morning," Ray said finally. "Probably." The label called twice, both times very excited. "Gerald Fitch at the network wants to talk to your people. There are 3 booking requests already, and it's not even 9:30. A pause. "You want to know the number on the clip?" "Not particularly." Ray looked at him. George was looking out the window at the Nashville skyline, the lights of the city, the particular darkness beyond it, the flat Tennessee sky above all of it. "Ray," George said. "Yeah." The song worked. Ray was quiet for a moment. It was an unusual question, coming from a man who had performed thousands of times and had very clear instincts about his own work. "Yeah," Ray said. "It worked." George nodded. He looked out the window. "Good," he said. At 11:15 p.m., Carla Fontaine was at her desk in the American Pulse office. Her notes spread around her, her laptop open, writing the first draft of the piece that would run in 48 hours. She had written and deleted her opening sentence 4 times. She needed something that contained the truth of the evening without reducing it. Something that was honest about what had happened without being sentimental about it. She wrote, "On Tuesday evening at 8:07 p.m. in a television studio in Nashville, a man laughed at George Strait. By 8:12, George Strait had reminded approximately 6 million people why that was a mistake. Not by arguing, not by walking off, by doing the only thing that has ever truly mattered, singing." She read it back. She kept it. At midnight, Derek Holloway was in his dressing room. The awards and plaques were still on the wall. The golden microphone was still mounted above the mirror. He was still in his stage clothes, his jacket over the back of a chair, his tie loosened. He was watching the clip on his phone, not the clip of himself. The clip of George Strait, the performance that had already been viewed at last count nearly 4 million times. He had watched it 3 times, each time getting to the same moment and stopping, the 2-second silence before the applause, the moment the room held its breath. He was thinking about what Patrice had said backstage. He sang a song. The simplicity of it, as if what had just altered the trajectory of his career was that uncomplicated, that obvious, that inevitable. He put his phone face down on the vanity. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and opened a contact he hadn't used in years. An old friend from Northwestern, a man named Tom Bauer who had gone into journalism instead of television, who had always said that Derek's instinct for performance was a gift and his instinct for cruelty was its shadow. He didn't call. He just looked at the name. Then he put the phone down again and sat in the silence of a room full of framed images of himself. And for the first time in a very long time, the room felt crowded. 3 days after the broadcast, the clip of George Strait's performance of Troubadour on the Derek Holloway Show had been viewed 47 million times across all platforms. This number, which the network's social media team reported with a mixture of pride and bewilderment, did not account for the broadcast itself, the clips shared outside of official channels. The phone recordings taken by audience members despite the show's policy against them, or the 7-minute segment that ran on Good Morning America the following Wednesday, which had its own separate viewership. What the number did account for was this: a moment that had happened live, unrehearsed, in response to something that was not supposed to generate a response, had found its way into 47 million moments of people's lives. People watching on lunch breaks, on commutes, on couches, late at night. People who had never heard of George Strait, and people who had grown up with him. People who did not listen to country music, and people for whom country music was the language of their most important memories. The comment sections, which are rarely worth examining, and in this case were compulsory, were filled with variations on the same theme: I wasn't expecting to cry. The sentence, in its countless permutations, was the most common response to the clip. Not incredible performance or legendary artist or any of the critical vocabulary that attaches itself to moments like this. Just the simple, surprised admission: I wasn't expecting to cry. Carla Fontaine's piece ran on Thursday morning and was shared 300,000 times in its first 6 hours. It was called What George Strait Answered With, and it was, by her own assessment, the best piece she had ever written, not because of its prose, which she thought was serviceable, but because the subject had given her something that most subjects didn't: actual truth to work with. She wrote about the engineering of the mockery, the carefully edited montage, the word relic, the "is the hat still wearing the man" line, the specific architecture of condescension that Derek Holloway had constructed. She wrote about the 2-second silence before the applause. She wrote about Beverly Ashton in the 4th row, whom she had tracked down after the broadcast and interviewed for 20 minutes on the sidewalk outside the building. She wrote about what Ray Colburn had said when she called him, a single sentence that she put at the end of the piece without comment: George has always known that the only answer worth giving is the honest one. She did not write about Derek Holloway's expression during the performance. She had considered it, had in fact written 3 paragraphs about it in her second draft, and then deleted them. Not because they were untrue, but because she understood in the editing that the story was not about what Derek Holloway felt. It was about what George Strait had made the room feel, which was something larger and more durable than any one person's reckoning. Patrice Dunning's conversation with Gerald Fitch and the network's PR and legal teams happened on Thursday afternoon, via a 2-hour conference call that she would later describe to her husband as the most boring crisis management I've ever participated in. The outcome of the conversation was, in practical terms, minimal. The network issued a statement praising the unscripted moment as evidence of the show's commitment to authentic entertainment. Derek Holloway posted a photograph to his social media, himself and George Strait taken in the green room before the broadcast, both smiling, with the caption, "The legend himself. What a night." It received approximately the amount of engagement that such posts receive when everyone watching understands that the post is doing a specific kind of work. Nobody called it an apology. It was not an apology. But something had changed. And Patrice, who had spent 26 years watching the machinery of live television manage and reshape and narrativize its own failures, recognized that this was a different kind of change from the usual kind. Not a PR repositioning, something internal. She had worked with Derek for 3 seasons. She had seen him at his best, which was genuinely impressive, and at his worst, which was what Tuesday night had been. She had, over those 3 seasons, had approximately 11 serious conversations with him about the line between wit and cruelty, between entertainment and harm. None of those 11 conversations had done what George Strait had done in 4 minutes. She thought about that. She thought about the difference between being told something and being shown something, about the difference between criticism and consequence, about the particular efficiency of truth when it is delivered not as argument but as evidence. She did not share these thoughts with anyone. She put them in the category of things she understood and would not explain, and went back to work. Ray Colburn spent the week after the broadcast handling the logistical consequences of 47 million views. There were interview requests from every major outlet. There were booking requests from shows and venues and festivals. There were calls from the label, different calls from the label than the calls from before Tuesday. The kind of calls that come when a corporation realizes it has been dramatically undervaluing something and is recalibrating with the urgency of people who are newly aware of their mistake. He managed all of it with the competence of 22 years and the steady patience of a man who had always known this moment would come. Not this specific moment, not a Tuesday night in Nashville, but the moment when the world remembered what it had been inattentive to. He did not tell George about most of the requests. He filtered them, sorted them, applied the criteria they had established over decades of collaboration. Does this serve the music? Does this align with who he is? Does this require him to be something he isn't? Most requests failed the third test and were declined. One was accepted, and Ray presented it to George on Friday morning over the phone with the brevity that their long familiarity allowed. Carnegie Hall, Ray said. January. Full band. A pause. Sold out. George asked. Sold out in 11 minutes after the announcement. Another pause. Dale know about the set list yet? I figured you'd want to tell him yourself. Tell him we're opening with Troubadour. Ray smiled. I'll tell him. Nolan Vickers received, the following Monday, a formal Emmy nomination notice for outstanding directing for a variety series. But that was not the thing that stayed with him. What stayed with him was something that happened on Thursday afternoon. He was in a coffee shop near the office, sitting at a corner table reviewing notes for the next broadcast, when a woman sat down next to him, mid-40s, unremarkable, the kind of person you would not notice in a crowd, and said, "Were you the director for Tuesday's show?" He looked up. "Yes, my father died in August," she said. "He was a country music guy his whole life. We grew up with it. I didn't really." She stopped, started again. "I watched the clip on Wednesday night and I called my mother. We talked for 2 hours. We hadn't talked for 2 hours since the funeral." She looked at him. "I just wanted someone from the show to know that," she said. She stood up and left. Nolan sat with his coffee and his notes and the weight of what she had said. And he thought about what television was for, its actual purpose beneath the ratings and the demographics and the commercial breaks and the network conference calls. He thought about what it meant to direct a camera at a moment of truth. He thought about the woman's father and George Strait and a Tuesday night in October and the specific technology of a real song delivered honestly in a room of people who needed to hear it. He put his notes away. He sat with his coffee for a while. 6 weeks after the broadcast, Derek Holloway sat across from Carla Fontaine in a coffee shop in Midtown Nashville. He had requested the meeting. This was unusual. Subjects did not usually request conversations with journalists who had written critical pieces about them, or pieces that, like Carla's, were not exactly critical, but were exactly honest, which sometimes amounted to the same thing from the subject's perspective. She had considered declining. She had accepted because she was, above all, a journalist, and because the story of what happened after a moment like Tuesday's was as interesting as the moment itself. He looked like himself, well-dressed, composed, the face that 11 million weekly viewers had come to recognize as the face of ease and wit and controlled intelligence. But something in the precision of the composure suggested that it was being maintained rather than natural. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "that you got it right." She waited. "The piece, what you wrote, the architecture of it, the way you described what I did." He paused. "I've read a lot of pieces about myself. I know the difference between someone who's being fair and someone who's being right. Which was it?" "Both." He looked at his coffee. "I've been thinking about why I did it. The segment, the relic thing." A pause. "I knew it would land. I knew the audience would go with it." That's the honest answer. It was effective. "I knew it would be effective, and I did it anyway, and I didn't think very much about what it was actually saying." Carla said nothing, and then he sang, Derek said. "And I sat there," and he stopped, started again. "I spent the rest of that broadcast thinking about what the difference is between being sharp and being what I was being." He looked at her. "I don't think I've landed on a clean answer." "That seems right," Carla said. Clean answers usually aren't. He almost smiled. You're going to write about this conversation. Yes, I know. He nodded. That's fine. I wanted it said. He picked up his coffee. He doesn't know I asked to meet with you, should he? Probably not. This isn't about him. This is about me trying to figure out what I want the next 10 years to look like. He set the coffee down. I'm 41. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm very good at it. And I spent Tuesday night watching someone who's been doing it for 50 years. And I realized that I have no idea what he has that I've been missing. Carla thought about this for a moment. I think, she said carefully, that what he has is that it's not about him. Derek looked at her. When he sang, she said, he wasn't performing for the room. He wasn't managing the situation, or getting even, or making a point. He was just playing the song. The song was the point. The song was the whole thing. A long silence. I built a career, Derek said slowly, on being the center of every room I'm in. Yes. And the most powerful moment in my studio in 3 seasons happened when someone else was. She let him sit with that. After a moment, he said, do you think he knew before that night? Do you think he knew it would? I think, Carla said, that he's been playing Troubadour his whole life because it's true. And on Tuesday night, he played it because it was the most true thing available to him. I don't think he calculated the impact. I think people who play true things don't usually need to calculate the impact. The truth does that on its own. Derek Holloway was quiet for a long time. Outside the coffee shop window, Nashville moved in its ordinary Tuesday way. People on sidewalks, cars on streets. The city conducting its business with the indifference of a place that has seen enough to know that moments pass and life continues. The coffee shop was warm, and the light was the particular amber of late autumn afternoons. And somewhere across town, in a rehearsal space that smelled like wood and amplifier heat, George Strait was working through a set list with Dale and the band, doing what he had always done, what he would continue to do, what no montage and no joke and no architecture of condescension could touch. I want to have him back on the show, Derek said. Carla looked at him. Not as a statement. Not as a PR thing. He met her eyes. Because I think there's a conversation we didn't have. That I didn't let us have. A pause. Do you think he would? I don't know, Carla said honestly. That would be his decision. Would you? He stopped. Never mind, I know you can't ask him for me. No, she said. I can't. He nodded. He looked out the window. I'm going to reach out to his manager, he said. Colburn. I'm going to ask. He was quiet for a moment. He'll probably say no. Maybe, Carla said, but I'm going to ask. She wrote it in her notebook. Not the words, those she already had. Something else. A single observation that she would put near the end of the piece she wrote about this conversation, published 11 days later, which would be read by, among many others, Ray Colburn, who would show it to George, who would read it twice and say nothing, and then call Ray back 3 hours later and say, tell Holloway yes. What she wrote in her notebook watching Derek Holloway look out at a Nashville Tuesday was this: the man who laughed at George Strait is trying to learn something. That might be the most interesting thing that happened this week. The second appearance of George Strait on the Derek Holloway Show aired on a Thursday in February. It was announced 48 hours before broadcast, which was enough time for the internet to do what the internet does: build expectation, construct narratives, predict outcomes with the confident inaccuracy of a medium that mistakes volume for insight. What actually happened was quieter than anyone predicted. Derek opened the interview differently. There was no segment, no montage, no prepared card of jokes filed under the guest's name. He opened it the way a man opens a conversation he actually wants to have, as with a question he genuinely didn't know the answer to. Tell me about the first song you ever wrote that you knew was real, he said. And George Strait, over those 50 years in almost geological patience with the performative and the superficial, sat in the guest's chair and looked at Derek Holloway and recognized, with the same precision with which he recognized a genuine note from a manufactured one that the question was honest, so he answered it honestly. They talked for 22 minutes. It was the longest uninterrupted conversation segment in the show's history. Nobody checked their phones. The audience, which had come in the particular state of heightened anticipation that the occasion warranted, went progressively quieter as the conversation deepened. The way that rooms go quiet not from boredom, but from the opposite, from the feeling of being present at something that is actually happening. Derek asked about the song. He asked about Troubadour, what it meant, where it came from, what it cost. George answered. Not at length. He was not a man who spoke at length about his own emotional interior, but with the specific precision of someone who had spent a long time understanding something and could now explain it simply. That song is about the decision, George said. When you're young, you're a troubadour because you don't know any other way. When you're older, you're a troubadour because you've chosen to be. That's the whole thing. That's the difference between starting and continuing. Starting is easy. Continuing, that's the work. Derek was quiet for a moment. Is that what you were saying? He asked. In October? George looked at him. It's what I was always saying. A pause. I think I wasn't listening, Derek said. He said it without performance, without the cushion of a joke or the redirect of a pivot. He just said it in a room of cameras and lights and 200 people and however many millions beyond them, and it sat in the air with the clean weight of something true. George nodded once. He didn't labor the moment. He didn't extract from it what a smaller man might have extracted. He simply acknowledged it with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire presence in this building, both times, and then said, "You want to hear another one?" The audience laughed. Derek laughed, a real laugh, loose and unmanaged, the laugh of a man who has been released from something. "I'd like that," he said. George stood. He walked to the microphone. The band found the opening chord. He didn't announce the song this time either. But Ray Colburn, in the wings, recognized the first note before it fully sounded. And he was smiling before the first word was sung, because the song was The Chair. Not a heavy song, not a monument, just a warm, human, funny, country-perfect song about the small, ordinary moments that constitute a life. And it was exactly right for the room, for the evening, for the particular kind of ending that wasn't an ending at all, but a continuation, which is what George Strait had always been. Not a relic, not a nostalgic artifact, not the ghost of a country music that had passed. A man who had started something honest 50 years ago and had continued it with such consistency and integrity that it had become, over time, something that could survive mockery and survive algorithm and survive the relentless machinery of an industry that consumed its own history and called it progress. A troubadour, still out here, carrying on. Carla Fontaine's final piece on the full arc of the story from October's broadcast to February's, from the laugh to the conversation to the song, ran on a Sunday morning in late February, under a headline she had written and rewritten 8 times before landing on the simplest version. George Strait didn't argue, he sang. Here's what happened next. It was shared in the first week over 1 million times. The comment that appeared most frequently in replies and reposts and quoted threads, in the language of 100 different demographics and generations and corners of the internet, was the same one that had appeared under the original clip in October, the sentence that was, perhaps, the most honest, critical response to what had happened across those 4 months. I wasn't expecting to cry. Beverly Ashton, who had driven from Murfreesboro on her birthday and ended up inside a moment she would talk about for the rest of her life, watched the February broadcast at home on her couch with her daughter beside her, and a bowl of popcorn between them that neither of them touched. When the last song ended and the credits rolled, her daughter, who had grown up hearing this music as background and had spent 4 months slowly, quietly reclassifying it, said, "We should go to Carnegie Hall." Beverly looked at her. January, her daughter said. Ray Colburn's office said there aren't still tickets, Beverly said. I got 2, her daughter said, 3 weeks ago. Beverly Ashton said nothing for a moment. Then she said, your father would have loved this. Her daughter took her hand. On the television, the credits finished and the screen went dark. And outside the window of Beverly Ashton's house in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, it was a clear February night, cold and still, with stars that were visible all the way to the horizon in every direction, the kind of sky that has nothing to do with television or social media or the machinery of culture and fame, and everything to do with the simple, durable fact that some things are real, and real things last.